beaming into your mind like a ray of cosmic revelation, smashing through the mainstream like a comet of prophecy. You are watching Planet Vrilock, and I am your host, Tom Vrilock. Welcome to the program. Tonight, I'm going to speak about what brought me into the magical thinking and the discovery of the Miraculous Prayer Board. So, tonight's story is titled Shadow over Japan. And the reason for this title will become obvious to you as I tell the story. So just sit back, relax, and allow my story to unfold in your mind's eye. So, I'm thinking back to, I believe sometime in the 1990s. I believe I was in my early 20s at the time, and this is when I had a very strange experience. I had had many paranormal type experiences throughout the course of my life, going as far back to my toddler years, and I can remember as far back as being 9 months old and being bathed in the kitchen sink by my mother. And there was a woman standing in the room who was not incarnate. So, my experiences go quite far back. But what is of particular interest to me right now is speaking of my experiences in my early 20s. And so that is where I'm going to speak of now. I had gone to bed, and in the midst of dream, I was awakened. I was awakened by a great shadow over me. And subsequently, I was literally pulled out of body and taken up by this shadow. I won't even speculate what it is or was. I'll simply call it by what it seemed to be, a great shadow. So I find myself high up in the sky. It's nighttime. The stars are beautiful, and the clouds are beneath my feet, and we are flying at speeds that I can't even comprehend. At length, I see land, and there's water, dark waters, and I come down with the shadow carrying me just above the level of the street. I don't know, about 20 feet above the street level or so, gradually sort of just hovering down over there. And it was a dark street corner that had one street coming this way and another street coming this way and terminating at a wall. I hovered there, and I remember seeing two lines of children walking in line, sort of perfectly walking in line in unison. And I remember thinking it was quite strange. These children were quite young. None of them were above the age of 9 or so. They had these bulky backpacks on, sort of like little spaceman backpacks, and these little uniforms, all identical uniforms. And the hour was quite late. I thought it was like maybe 8 p.m. or perhaps 8:30, as late possibly as late as 9 o'clock in the evening. And I thought this quite strange. Why these children would be walking in such a dark place in two perfect lines, in uniform, without some kind of a chaperone or, an adult present, or someone older, an older child, or someone walking with them. And then their faces became sort of familiar to me as I watched on. Their faces became more and more familiar to me. And I saw a couple of the children's faces quite clearly, and I knew somehow these are children I will meet one day. And I also realized that I was in another country. It then became apparent to me that the country I was in was Japan. And there's more details to this story, but I'll save it for a potential interview in the future, or perhaps another video. But so what happens is I wake back up, and as often would be the case, I would wake up sort of feeling like my neck was a rubber chicken, and I couldn't move right away, and I sort of just couldn't feel my body, and I could hear this breathing sound all around me. And then gradually I would come to and flex my fingers and get up and start my day. These sort of projections were happening quite often, and quite often during my late teens and early 20s. So what does happen next is some years later, I do indeed find myself living in Japan. And one night, after eating a Japanese pancake, it's called Okonomiyaki. After having some of this Okonomiyaki, I am walking back, and I stop at this corner because I hear all these footsteps coming. And I sort of peek around the corner, and there's two lines of children walking. And as they get nearer, I see their faces, and then I see the two faces that I recognized from my dream. And that's when it hit me that I was standing at exactly that spot where this shadow had taken me in the dream world to see this place. Without giving too many details, I was meant to help these young people, and then some years later I would be challenged by other events. We had Super Typhoon Neoguri, for instance, and that took about five or 6 days for me to work on it in order to sort of reduce the power of the storm, transform it into a subtropical, and then shield and coast it, sort of slide it off the coast of Tokyo. And so the typhoon never came inland. After Neoguri, we had a big typhoon called Typhoon Halong. Halong or Halong. And it was on short notice that I became aware of it, and so my method had to be quite different for working with this storm. And I was able to concentrate on lifting this storm up high, just high enough that it would cease to be a typhoon or hurricane. So I step outside, and it's this beautiful, beautiful sunny sky. There aren't really any clouds in the sky, but there's this little tiny spiral just up above and off a bit. And I'm looking at it, and I think, wow, that is the strangest cloud I've ever seen. It's just this really tiny, thin spiral. And then it hit me. Could it possibly be that that spiral, which resembles still life artwork, is Typhoon Halong? So I go back about my day, and later that evening I check the satellites, and I see that Typhoon Halong never hit us, and instead, just north of Japan in the ocean is Typhoon Halong reforming over the water and heading towards Siberia or some part of Russia there. And so that was another method. And I was becoming quite proficient at these sort of things. But then we were hit by a series of torrential rain clouds. And I thought, well, I have my staff that I've made, which represents a connection between the sky and the earth, and I'll just use that. And I had used that many times to sort of change the weather just a little bit, make little adjustments here and there, and so on, or to throw off thunderstorms when I wanted to sleep or whatnot. And so I thought, no big deal. Well, then a very negative feeling came over me. There seemed to be an intent in this trail, this train of clouds, as if a great nastiness was within it. My staff flew out of my hand. A thunderclap struck perfectly right smack on my building. I felt the energy come through my staff, the staff leave my hand, and my nerves were just shot. It was from that point on where I realized I needed a little bit of cosmic help, a little bit of something extra. So I tried what most people do. I tried a prayer. And interestingly enough, something happened. The power within the heart opened. And what I witnessed was sort of an invisible halo holding back these black clouds. Red lightning flashing everywhere. That died down. And we were on watch for some days, or I don't know, over a week or something, with these torrential rain clouds. Other prefectures were getting hit quite hard. But the damage had already been done quite extensively before realizing that I needed to call upon some higher aid, if you will. So I saw the mountains come down, trees and houses splintering and washing down into the streets. I witnessed young students march up the mountain in knee-high boots and carrying shovels, and some of these people fell into the mud and debris and were not able to get back out. So there were a lot of trials. We had the Fukushima Daiichi meltdown, and I remember just before that time, I had heard the voice of my stepfather, who is and was at that time already deceased. I heard his voice calling me through my bed pillow, and so I got up out of the bed and looked at the clock. What time is it? It was 4:44 in the morning, and this went on for some time just before that. And in some other cases, there were visitations by, in this case, a golden spirit, like a shield, who appeared and was holding back a tsunami And I was wide awake in bed, and this entity allowed me to continue to see it or her. The face was rather Roman-like, like a Roman official, or perhaps a Greek female warrior, or perhaps a high-ranking person at that time. And her face was embossed on this sort of disc or shield, and she was holding back some kind of a super tidal wave. I could smell the salt, literally. And so these things continued for quite a while. But now the development of the Miraculous Prayer Board is something that helped me do more than just working with atmokinesis or wet weather influence and so on. I was able to work with telluric forces in the earth, and also to contact people who had departed or had passed away, and so on. So, all very real events, and all very important. I often felt as if I was meant to be right there in Japan, taking care of things. There are a number of other stories, very personal stories of people who needed a little help here and there, or, just things that sort of teach us and shape us into who we are. And so it's been a learning experience for me, but also quite an interesting challenge as well. So I just thought you might be interested in this story about the world of the mysterious, and why I believe that we're not alone, and that there are these outsiders or other types of spirit or life forms that we do not understand, which exist usually within the invisible spectrum, if that makes any sense. So yes, that is my story. The Miraculous Prayer Board, that instrument, that began as a means of perfecting the power of prayer to make it coherent, and more likely that your prayers would be answered, because it is an instrument so designed to do this. One time, wow, I might throw this in as well. Japan became a very mystical place for me. There's just something in the air. It's like being on another planet. The moment I step off the plane, say in the month of January, there is this fresh, beautiful smell in the air. It's like nothing I can describe. There's no comparison. You just have to go there and find it. Experience it for yourself. It's like being in another dimension or something. And so the country became rather mystical and mysterious to me. I climbed mountains and visited remote shrines and that sort of thing. And it was one of my pastimes to wander around and look at gardens, particularly after it had stopped, rain, when it stopped raining, and I would take walks through these misty gardens and on this little path going between all the little homes, and admire the rock gardens and little dwarf trees and so on. And one time, I was about to step my foot down in mid-stride when a swarm of dragonflies appeared right in front of my face. There were these bright red, or crimson-colored dragonflies. crimson or magenta. Maybe a little bit of both. And I just note that detail because my very first Miraculous Prayer Board, the design was drawn with an ink of the color of magenta. And in any sense, in any matter, during that time, just before taking my walk, I was pondering the original name of Japan and how one of these old names I had heard of related to dragonfly. And so this swarm of dragonflies comes right up in my face, and so I stop in mid-stride and I look down at my foot as I back up a bit because I was taken aback. Ooh, big swarm of dragonflies right out of nowhere. And so I step back and look down, and there is this venomous snake. It's called a mamushi snake. Very, very poisonous. And so I looked at the snake, and then the snake slithered away, and I look up, and the dragonflies are gone. It wasn't the only time that something unusual like this happened, but it was one of the most fun experiences, I should say. It was rather a beautiful experience because after you live in a place and you really love the nature there, we lived right next to this long stretch of river. After you live in a place like that for a while, it does become, it becomes home. You live it, you breathe it, and it becomes magical to you. And indeed, that was my life. So my life was filled with more magic than I'd ever known before. And all because a certain entity or spirit had come to me to show me my future, where I would be, and who I was supposed to help, and later other events that I would have to work on. So we are not alone, and this Miraculous Prayer Board that I have designed will help all of us make the world a better place and to work with these forces and intelligences in the world to work miracles for yourself, for your family, and perhaps to help someone else out there, or to fulfill your destiny. So if you want one, come to Vrilock.com/shop and make a purchase of the Miraculous Prayer Board. We have a new Miraculous Prayer Board Mini, 2 bus lines, which allows more psychometric power. So stay tuned for further developments and news at Vrilock.com, and subscribe if you haven't already. I hope you've enjoyed this program. This is your host, Vrilock, signing out.